If you would like to listen to or download any or all of Power at Work's blogcasts in podcast form, they are available for streaming and download on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Overcast. Just search Power at Work on any podcast platform and enjoy all of Power at Work's podcasts. While you're there, two things we would like you to do. First, subscribe, and that way you won't miss any Power at Work podcasts. Second, please give Power at Work a 5-star rating, a like, a love, whatever is the tool that your podcast provider gives you. It helps others who care about workers and worker power to find Power at Work's content. They will be grateful, and so will we. Hello, powerful people, and welcome to the Power Half Hour live on LinkedIn and preserved for posterity on poweratwork.us. I'm Seth Harris from the Burns Center for Social Change. Hey, the Power Half Hour brings you more voices, more news, and more worker power insights in just 30 minutes. I've got an expert panel of 3 guests who I'll introduce you to in just a moment. You can see them. Those who are in our video audience can see them arrayed in front of you. The panelists, when I give them a chance, are going to talk about the big stories and the big developments that affect worker power, workers, and unions over the last couple of weeks. And then I'm going to ask them to predict the future, to tell us what's coming down the pike at us, the big developments, the big stories, the big events relating to worker power and unions. And then at the end of the show, we're going to offer our guests just a little... It's like the mint that you get at the end of the meal, a little thank you called shameless plugs and shout outs. They can promote anyone or anything they would like. Self-promotion is enthusiastically welcomed. And then, audience, if you're hungry for more, stick with us. We're going to go to overtime after the first half hour. We're going to take your questions. We've already got some questions in from the Power at Work community. By email, I'll tell you during overtime how you can send us an email with your questions for the next panel. So come back don't come back, stick with us, and then stick with us after the next 28 minutes, and we'll do overtime and take your questions. One more thing, audience, follow Power at Work on LinkedIn and subscribe to Power at Work at poweratwork.us. You can also follow the Burns Center for Social Change on YouTube. That's where all the Power at Work material on YouTube can be found. Lots of ways to follow Power at Work. All right, let's meet our panel. From the Queen City of Cincinnati, Ohio, she's a professor of law at the University of Cincinnati College of Law, a former attorney for the National Labor Relations Board, and most importantly, my friend and co-author, it's Anne-Marie Lofaso. Hi, Anne.
Hey, Seth. Thanks for inviting me and thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you here. And from New York's Capital District, Albany, New York, he's the labor reporter for The Guardian, covering a wide range of work and workplace-related stories. It's Michael Sainato. Michael, welcome back to the Power Half Hour.
Thanks for having me on again, Seth.
It's always a pleasure. And as always, from the People's Republic of Tacoma Park, he's a pro-union consultant and the AFL-CIO's former director of advocacy. It's my old friend, and I'm not calling you old. We've been friends for a really long time. Bill Samuel. Hey, Bill.
Friends of long standing. Hi, Seth. Thanks for having me back.
That would have been better. That would have been a little more elegant way to introduce you. All right, topic number 1, panel. We're going to start with you, Bill. We're going to look over our shoulders. We're going to look in the rearview mirror. You're going to tell us what was the most important, the most interesting, the biggest development, news story, activity affecting workers and worker power that happened over the last couple of weeks. Bill.
Okay, I don't know about most interesting. One I mentioned last time I was on, and that's that it appears that the Senate will confirm a new labor secretary. Probably today, Keith Sonderling. He'll be replacing the scandal-ridden Lori Chavez DeRima, who you may have talked about on a previous episode. He's not an extremist. He's not full MAGA. That's a low bar for the labor secretary. He's considered to be kind of a steadying hand. We'll see. Also this week, possibly today, maybe in a couple of days before the Senate adjourns, they will confirmed two more, another board member, a Republican, that will mean there'll be a Republican majority capable of reversing precedents. And that's an important distinction. The previous board had a quorum for a few months, but not enough Republicans to reverse precedent. And the precedents that they probably will go after, we assume these are Biden era kind of pro-union precedents. The Cemex case, which speeds bargaining, and the Amazon case prohibiting captive audience meetings. One other thing I want to mention, though, it looks this week again like the continuing resolution that's about to pass before the Senate goes out for the rest of the month will probably include language prohibiting the administration from instituting a new requirement of questionable legality that would have required a senior administration officials to pre-approve all discretionary grants. These are political officials, allowing them to block funding that conflicts with presidential priorities. That would grant agencies wide authority to cancel or suspend existing grants midstream or shift based on shifting national interests, in quotes, Trump interests or priorities. This could affect money for union-sponsored job training, safety and health programs, international labor monitoring and enforcement. And Seth, you will recall, because we both served in prior Democratic administration, how political appointees like us were forbidden from intervening in grant-making decisions. So this would be a complete reversal, kind of a return to the old spoils system. But it looks like there'll be the votes in the Senate to prohibit that from taking effect, at least for the length of this continuing resolution.
Well, Bill, you're just a font of bad news, I gotta say. I wouldn't put the Keith Sonderling news in the same category as the NLRB news, but I think the NLRB news is going to be huge. You are right. The board has been pretty quiet at the NLRB. There's been some activity in the general counsel side, but the board has not done a tremendous amount. But now I think it's Katie bar the door. We're going to see all kinds of precedents falling. I'll be curious to see if Ann wants to get in on that topic. And Ann, let me turn to you now. What's happened over the last couple of weeks that you think is important for worker power, workers, and unions?
Okay, so I won't get into the NLRB until later, but over the past few weeks, we've seen two labor stories that appear at first glance to have nothing in common, but I want to show how they have something in common that has to do with worker power. So first is the Treehouse Foods in Tennessee, where the workers represented by the retail, wholesale, and department store union ratified a new collective bargaining agreement just in July 18th. And the agreement provided for significant wage increases, 14% over the life of the contract, 5.5% raise in the first year, a $1,000 ratification bonus, improved leave provisions such as the new floating holidays, personal leave, vacation leave, expanded funeral and bereavement leave, and other improvements that the union has characterized as increasing workers' quality of life and job security. So, and there's more to that story. That's good news, which is that the union highlighted that they actually were able to have membership increase during the bargaining campaign, and workers stated that bargaining gave them a stronger collective voice with management. So the story here is that this shows how contract negotiations can strengthen worker organization even after the union has been certified, and why anti-union employers often fight unions over first contract negotiations. Now, the second story is a legal story in federal court where public sector unions representing civilian employees of the Department of Defense are challenging Secretary Hegseth's decision to terminate collective bargaining agreements covering tens of thousands of federal workers. And the unions are asking the court to preserve those agreements while they challenge the legality of the government's action. So, first blush, these stories seem to be unrelated. One's about successful contract negotiations, the other is about litigation over the future of collective bargaining rights. But together, they are really stories about the institutions of worker power. So the first story shows how what worker power looks like even when those institutions function as intended. Right? When they do. So workers organize, they select representatives, they bargain collectively, and they reach an agreement that improves the terms and conditions of their work, and they even strengthen their own worker power. The gains are important, but more important than those economic improvements is whether the workers have meaningful voice in the workplace to shape their own work lives. The Seth litigation presents the opposite question. What happens when those institutions are weakened or removed? So for federal employees, collective bargaining is the mechanism through which they can negotiate, just like any other employee. And the legal issues in that case are interesting and complex, but beneath those technical legal issues is this basic labor question. What happens to worker voice when the structures that support that voice are no longer available? So together, I think these stories belong together because we too often discuss, we focus on outcomes like how much do workers earn and whether a union wins an election, but the outcomes matter. Those outcomes do matter, but they depend on something very fundamental, which is whether workers actually possess the institutions that can support them to act collectively. You know, one worker can negotiate, but it's limited, but together they can really get big gains. So I think that this is a really big deal in the last 2 weeks that we're seeing these opposite things happening, and hopefully it will be positive eventually. But right now we see tension.
And do you want to give us a prediction about how that Defense Department litigation comes out?
Ultimately, I think they should lose. I mean, the union should win, but I hate making predictions anymore because the courts, many times when it gets to the higher levels, they just throw precedent at it. So I think that, I mean, the big issue there is whether they followed administrative law, and I think we didn't. So that's why I think this is like a real winner. And the national security is just BS, that argument. So I would say on a law exam that the answer is that the unions should win. But, you know, stay tuned.
If only all of life were a law exam, Anne, I think everybody would be happier people. Don't you think? It's just
right
my
now,
take. Michael, yeah. Michael, look over your shoulder. Tell us what happened over the last couple of weeks. You can extend that to more than a couple of weeks. And tell us what was important for workers, worker power, and unions.
Well, last week, bad news. An appeals court in Wisconsin ruled to uphold Act 10. For those that don't know, Act 10 was enacted by Scott Walker, took away collective bargaining rights for public sector workers. Union density in Wisconsin was over 15% before it was enacted. Now it's under 9%. Obviously, not all of that is due to Act 10, but that was certainly a catalyst for that. The case is likely to head to the state Supreme Court, and with the makeup, hopefully they rule against the law. But I think it's just one of those cases. Yes, it affects Wisconsin state workers, but I think it has ripple effects, outside of the state and for union power, and it impacts thousands of workers, not just their collective bargaining rights, but it forced them to pay a lot more for benefits like health insurance. For they're already receiving low salaries in Wisconsin and the public sector. So that was one of the things that hasn't been mentioned yet. So.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you bringing that up, and tell me if I'm wrong here, but to some extent, Act 10 was the first time in a state that has been a fairly pro-union state for a long time that a governor and a legislature really took a sledgehammer to public employee collective bargaining. There are other states that have no public employee collective bargaining laws or extremely limited public employee collective bargaining laws, but Wisconsin has long had public employee collective bargaining, I think going back to the 1960s. And Scott Walker and the Republicans in the legislature just absolutely took a sledgehammer to it. So the effort to overturn Act 10 is symbolically important, but it's also important for the workers in Wisconsin. Do I have that history right?
Absolutely, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, this is what the fight over the Wisconsin Supreme Court, one of the fights over at the Wisconsin Supreme Court has been about in the elections. And now there is a what some people are calling a liberal majority on that court. It'll be interesting to see what they do with that litigation. All right, it's topic number 2. What's coming next? Guests, get out your crystal balls, get out your telescope so you can see as far down the road as you possibly can, but not too far. We're not interested in what's going to happen in 2137. We're interested in the next few days, next few weeks, next few months, next few years. What will be the most important story or development or innovation or event affecting workers, worker power, and unions? And let's start with you.
Okay, but before I get into that, I just want to say that Act 10 is even more symbolic because Wisconsin was the first state to give public employees the right to organize. So I just want to say that's a really important story, and Michael, thanks for raising it. My crystal ball. Uh, so Recently, there was a decision in the DC Circuit, hostile Manita, which is about which the panel was 2 Trump appointees and 1 appointee by George H.W. Bush. So completely conservative panel. All right, there's a dissent. Okay, so what happens in this case? Pretty simple case. Hospital Manita purchases a hospital in Puerto Rico, and so it's a successor employer. Then the hospital initially recognizes the union, but later claims that union lacks support. So it withdraws recognition, refuses to bargain. So the NLRB charges it with unfair labor practices. The ALJ applies the successor bar, which is precedential. And that's been precedent since the Obama years. So that's been 15 years, and refuses to consider the hospital's evidence of loss of majority support. So it goes to the board, it gets affirmed. The hospital petitions for review, and Judge Edwards, who actually probably knows more about labor law than anyone in the DC Circuit, says this is okay. But in the meantime, Loper Bright comes, and so the Supreme Court just takes this case and it just says, look, we're not deciding this case. Just decide whether Loper Bright has changed this or not.
Just for our audience's edification, Loper Bright.
Oh, sorry.
Why don't you explain what Loper Bright was? The Supreme Court decision in Loper Bright.
Yes. So Loper Bright took away Chevron deference from, or overruled Chevron, which was said that that agencies get, like the NLRB, are that courts have to defer to reasonable interpretations of the National Labor Relations Act. But when it comes to the National Labor Relations Board, there's lots of precedent besides Chevron that has the Supreme Court precedent that says that the board always got deference. Now, whether it was as high as Chevron, that's a different story, but it was deferential. So this is the interesting story that's going to go into my crystal ball. So the reason this is interesting in this case is because the DC Circuit, which is the default circuit, which means anyone can go to it, says it doesn't go, by the way, to the original panel, to Judge Edwards. It goes to this very conservative panel, and the 2 Trump appointees say Loper Bright requires completely independent judgment, judicial judgment, so it ignores all that Supreme Court precedent where there is some deference. And then it gets rid of the successor bar. That's not the story. So what? Okay. But they say it's in conflict with the text of the NLRA. But they don't look at Supreme Court precedent at all that has looked at the text and has actually said that you can have certain types of situations that can create bars, not just successorship bars, but other things. So it actually doesn't look at these things. And so what's interesting, the dissent brings this out and says, first of all, the DC Circuit didn't rely on Chevron. And so why are you saying that it did, and that therefore we have to do this all over again? And then it goes into these Supreme Court precedents like Fall River, Curtin Matheson, Allentown, Mass, by the way, which was written by Scalia, and to say that this really is a reasonable policy choice. So the crystal ball here is that we're seeing a revolution. But it's a split in the circuits right now. But we're seeing a revolution in how agencies are being treated. I'm concerned that eventually this might mean that the NLRA will be overturned as unconstitutional, avoided, I should say, as unconstitutional. But it also is just saying that the circuit court are not even paying attention to Supreme Court. We don't just have a Supreme Court that is overruling precedent, which is fine. They're allowed to do that. They're actually allowed to do that. We have courts of appeals that are just ignoring precedent they don't like by the Supreme Court. That's what's going to be happening in the future.
Yeah, that's very disturbing, because let me just say, I have actually read Loper Bright. I might even go so far as to say I teach Loper Bright, and that's not what it says. It does not, the Supreme Court did not say, hey, pay no attention to anything that we say. That doesn't count either. Just do whatever you want, because that's not law. And that is what we're seeing in a lot of these courts of appeals, is what we all had thought law was is not law anymore. It's just sort of the judgment of the people who happen to be sitting on the panel, which is not how it's supposed to work. So that is really disturbing. But thank goodness Bill is going to jump in with an uplifting, positive, empowering, ennobling story about something that's coming, affecting worker power, workers, and unions. It's going to make us all feel better after all that bad news.
I'm going to try, but first I'll say nothing good is likely to happen over the next few months. But looking ahead to November, and Seth, I know you're not interested in politics, but I think we're going to have, there are some very interesting races that'll be decided, particularly among a group of House challengers who are known as the Blue Collar Brigade. These are union members running for office. And there are also a couple of Senate candidates, Dan Osborne, an iron worker running in Nebraska, Troy Jackson, who we've been in the news a lot lately, a former machinist running in Maine. And then among the 5 House members I just referenced in the Blue Collar Brigade, Bob Brooks, a firefighter running in Pennsylvania, Randy Villegas, I think that's how you pronounce it, a teacher running in California, Brian Poindexter, an iron worker running in Ohio, Sam Forstag, a smoke jumper, which I assume is a firefighter, running in Montana, and Kayla Burke, who hasn't yet won her primary, an AFA union official, flight attendant, running in her primary in Minnesota. Now, this group, if they're elected, will join several other union members who are already serving. Donald Norcross, an IBW member, IBW business agent from New Jersey, Mark Pocan, a painter, Nikki Budzinski, UFCW member Steve Lynch, an iron worker. So there's what's happening, over a period of years, and hopefully in November, is a growing class of union members or people very closely associated with unions in the House and Senate, and that can't help but be a good sign for worker power, assuming at some point we have a president willing to sign legislation that comes from these new pro-union members. So that's what I'm looking forward to. I'm going to skip over the next 4 months. Not even 4 months now, and go right to November and hope for the best outcome in the midterm elections.
Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot. How many union members will be serving in the House of Representatives when they swear the oath on January 8th, 2027?
Okay, this isn't brought to you by Calsheet, right? I'm just guessing.
No, this is not. No. We don't have a deal with whatever that. I didn't get the name because we don't have a deal with them or with the other one. This is just you giving a prediction. Yeah. How many union members will be sitting in the House of Representatives and swearing the oath on January 8th?
That's a really interesting question, because there are a lot of members serving now who you don't think of as union members. I remember Rosa DeLauro, I think belonged to AFSCME or AFT 60 years ago. So there are a lot of, there are a fair number. I'm guessing maybe a couple dozen House members have belonged to unions, maybe fewer who really identify, more recently as union members. The Senate will be very different. If Dan Osborne wins and Troy Jackson, that will be a new sort of class of pro-union, really self-identified as union members in the U.S. Senate. So don't hold me to those numbers, but that's my guess.
Yeah, we just erase this tape when we're done with it. We never do anything with it. All right. We are up to everybody's favorite segment. It's shameless plugs and shout outs. Each guest is going to get about a minute and a half to plug or shout out anything or anyone they would like. Michael Sainato, what is your shameless plug or shout out?
Other than following me on Blue Sky, I'm gonna be covering the midterms 4 of the 5 candidates from the Blue Collar Brigade I've done profiles on. So far, I'm speaking with a candidate, the Democratic nominee for Darrell Issa's vacated seat, who actually helped write the PRO Act. So not only are there a lot of union members running in highly contested seats that are up for grabs that the DCCC has identified, but a lot of these candidates are focusing on affordability. And if they're not union members, they're leaning on heavily on their stories of a working class upbringing and wanting to tackle costs, and some might not be outright saying they're a union member, but it's in there. I spoke with Jake Johnson, who is running in Minnesota's first congressional district, and he is heavily involved with his teachers union. So I think it's unprecedented in kind of how heavily these candidates are leaning into it. And I think it'll be interesting to see, one, if they're elected, how successful those tactics are, and then two, how will they govern compared to what we've been seeing in recent years.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. One of the big questions that's raised by your comments and Bill's comment is there a difference between having someone who's straight out of the labor movement, who's been a union leader, been an active union member, and goes right into elective office, and someone who is a supporter and has a relationship with the labor movement, maybe has been endorsed by the labor movement, but doesn't have the labor movement experience themselves? What difference will that make ultimately when they are voting and when they're governing and when they're advocating and when they're telling stories on the floor of the House, and also telling stories, very importantly, to the media and to their constituents? All right, Bill Samuel, what is your shameless plug or shout out?
I don't produce any original material. I say that every time. So I'm going to plug a recent EPI report, and I think it actually may have started at the FL-CIO years ago. We used to call it the Union Advantage Report. This one is about a study which demonstrates that if current union membership increased by 30, if it increased to triple 30%, which would be about where it was in the 1950s, what would happen to the average worker? And the average worker would get a 15% raise. That's for the median worker, $270,000 over a 35-year career. Obviously, it would improve the availability of health insurance and retirement security. It would narrow the racial wage gap, and all those things if we could increase union membership and density. And I think that's a report well worth reading and hoping comes true.
EPI meaning the Economic Policy Institute. And let me just say, I'm for it. I am for tripling the union density rate in America. All right, Ann Lofaso, what is your shameless plug or shout out?
Okay, so I have no shameless plug, but I do have 2 shout outs, which is to 2 sets of workers. I just want to give a shout out to the NLRB employees for persevering, and also the employees and unions who have been pushing for to get rid of Act 10. I think this is a story of perseverance, and it is, I know that sometimes it's very depressing, but they are, especially when they have to go to court, both groups have to go to court, and they see bad things happening, but they are persevering, they're working hard, and they're working hard in difficult conditions. So I give them my praise.
Always good to shout out workers here on Power at Work. I'm for it. All right, audience, stick with us if you can. We'll begin the Power Half Hours overtime in just a minute. For Ann Lofaso, Bill Samuel, Michael Sainato, and our producer, Ayush Kanwalkar, thank you for joining the Power Half Hour. Stick around for overtime, but for right now, stay powerful, everybody. All right, guests, grab a sip of water, inhale, do a little mindfulness exercise if you would like. Well, that'll give Ayush some time to both to check LinkedIn for any additional questions and also to post up the questions that we received by email. Audience, if you have a question and you're in our live audience, go ahead and post it on LinkedIn. Ayush will get it and bring it over and post it in our chat, and I will read it out. And this panel will answer the question. So you've got to be in the live audience to get your question answered by this panel, unless they come back in the future, which they hopefully will. But if you would like to submit a question that will be answered by our next panel 2 weeks from today, you can submit it by sending an email to poweratwork@theburnscenter.org. It's poweratwork@THEBURNES center.org. That's obviously our email address. We will save your question for next time, and the next panel will answer it, and we will now let me take a look at the studio chat and see what we have. Here are the questions we received before the show started. And again, live audience, if you'd like to ask any questions, we encourage you to do that. All right. Oh, this is a sort of an existential question, maybe mostly for you, Michael, but for others as well. This is our reader speaking, our viewer, our audience member, our community member. Not long ago, I felt like I was watching and reading news stories about unions all the time. But now I rarely see a labor story in the news unless there's a big strike. Is that a bad sign for unions?
You know, I think it's an issue given that I think it's partially the political climate we're in, obviously, because everything's Trump related. I would push back and say a lot of Trump stories, a lot of stuff I do has to do with unions and regarding what they're doing and what they're trying to do to labor unions. Another part of that is the further concentration of the media. What happened with the Washington Post, with CBS. I think they're looking back on 2021. There was that Striketober. There were a lot of union organizing campaigns that were getting started. Starbucks, Apple. Those things are still going on, but they've really dissipated and I think reflect broken labor law. And I think I would like to see those things get resolved politically in the next few years. But it's depressing. There need to be more labor reporters. I can't do everything on my own, and there's you have my colleagues on, but there's so few of us.
Yeah, let me just say, it's a small circle that we keep rotating through here on the Power Half Hour, but I think that's a fair point. Bill, you wanted to jump in on this?
I'm going to give a historical point here. Back in the old days, when George Meany was president of the AFL-CIO, before probably at least 2 out of the 3 of you were born, the communications director, a guy named Rex Hardesty, his job was to keep the AFL-CIO out of the news. That was considered a successful week when the AFL-CIO was not in the news. Now they represented 30% of the workforce, so they were doing quite well. They didn't need to be in the news to get better contracts and wages and benefits for their members. I think the fact that the labor movement now represents 10% or less, certainly less than the private sector, I think is a reason it doesn't get as much news. But when they're active, like the stand-up strikes, the UAW, Michael mentioned some other recent labor actions, they're going to get news. So it's really a function of how active they are and how much it's breaking through, because it's affecting ordinary Americans.
Yeah. Andy, you want in on this one?
I would just say that that's probably true about the mainstream news, but what I would say to your audience member is to look at the actual labor reporters and more independent news outlets that actually specialize in labor. And you'll see a lot more. But mainstream, is doing that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. We have lots of labor reporters on, and they are writing about labor and unions, all workers and worker power and unions all the time. But I think the point that the audience member is making is that there's a seemingly smaller number of union-related stories that are breaking through into the mass media. They're not making it onto the evening news. They're not even making it onto the cable news shows. You don't hear about them on NPR or on radio, or you see it in social media, depending upon what your social media feed is. And I think there are a couple of reasons for that. One is, I think Michael's point is an important one, and that is that Trump blots out the sun. He makes so much news, so much noise, so much craziness, so much attention-grabbing effort on his part. He always wants to lead the news, that just does squelch a lot of other important stories in our society. But the other thing is, I think the truth is that the kind of big strikes, big organizing drives that we were seeing are just not as prominent now. We are not seeing as many of them, even if you are following labor reporters and social media feeds with a lot of labor folks and unions on them. There's just, in this political environment, it's kind of risky to raise your head up, and folks are being a little bit careful about it. So I don't think that the viewer is, the audience member is reacting to something that's just totally not true. There is a lot of labor news, but it's not breaking out in a big way like it used to. All right. Okay, Ann, I see the word Supreme Court, so this is probably going to be for you.
Oh, no.
How does the Supreme Court's decision that Trump now controls all the so-called independent federal agencies affect the NLRB? Is the White House going to be making all the decisions about organizing and collective bargaining? I assume this is a reference. I know it must be a reference to the decision by the Supreme Court in a case called Trump versus Slaughter. That Ann knows this. Just for our audience's sake, Trump versus Slaughter, which essentially said the president can fire the leaders of independent agencies. That was a case about a Federal Trade Commission commissioner. I think her name is Rebecca Slaughter. So Trump fired her. Ann actually was I'm going to boast about Ann. I'm going to shout out Ann, even though she's here. She wrote a terrific article about how the Slaughter decision might affect the NLRB. But Ann, now you're on the spot. The audience member wants to know, does this mean the White House is now making all the NLRB's decisions for it?
Well, no, but it maybe indirectly is what's going to happen is it definitely affects the NLRB. It means that the president can fire any of the board members at any time and without cause. So they're at-will employees, essentially. But I think it goes deeper. I think it could affect regional directors. I'm not even sure how deep it goes, but it's going to go pretty deep. It can go deep. Now, the president is only going to do this if something catches his eye. But I think this means that federal employees are going to be more careful to do what Trump wants for any president. It could be, what if it's President AOC, any president, right? So I always say, be careful what you wish for, right? So this is Trump right now, but it could be a social democrat in the future. And so what it means is that they are going to be much more accountable to one president, one person. And they say that's democratic, but people don't vote for a president for all the same reasons. You could like a president because they're pro-life or pro-choice, and that's like your litmus test, but you don't like anything else that president does. And so it really, and not to mention also that it's not completely democratic who we vote for. So to answer the question is, I think indirectly it affects it, but it won't affect necessarily like contract negotiations or anything like that, but how the board then deals with whether it was the stat-based bargaining and things like that. So yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah.
Follow-up questions, Seth?
Go ahead.
As a regular listener. So the NLRB and I think a lot of other agencies have this partisan breakdown. So when the Republicans in the White House, there's 3 Republicans and 2 Democrats, and vice versa when a Democrat is in the White House. I think other agencies have that same thing. I believe in many cases it's more by tradition than law. And the question is there any reason Trump couldn't put 5 Republicans on the NLRB if the Senate would be willing to confirm them?
There's no reason for the NLRA. There might be for other statutes that I'm not familiar with, but definitely not for the NLRA. They can put 5. It's completely tradition. And that Trump doesn't care about unwritten tradition. He's very clear about that from the beginning.
But you have to ask the question, why would he do that? How does it help him? He's already, if you had three Republicans, and there was disagreement among those three Republicans about what they were going to do, and he didn't want to see split votes where the Democrats were able to moderate decisions made by the NLRB, then you could see him. That's not the people that he's appointing to the NLRB. They are going to be taking a straight management line every single step of the way. I agree with Ann. They're not going to have to follow the White House. They know what the White House wants. They know what the management bar wants. They come out of the management bar. So they are going to, they're all going to be in lockstep. There won't be any 2-1-2 votes or anything like that. I think we're just going to see very straightforward 3-2 votes. So why fire? Actually, there's only going to be one Democrat. You were mentioning, Bill, that they're going to confirm the third Republican. They're also going to reconfirm Dave Prouty, the Democrat, former union a lawyer, back to his seat. They probably will never fill the second Democratic seat on there. I don't know. You may know something I don't know. But there's no reason to fire Dave because, he dissents. Who cares? That's dissents lose. That's, it's another word for dissenter. One of my law professors used to say is loser. So maybe ultimately Dave's opinions will matter, but right now he doesn't get to decide. Okay, next question. In the middle of the hottest summer in memory, with Europe burning and the Western United States running out of water, the Trump administration and Republicans are trying to kill regulations that protect workers from too much heat at work. What's going to happen? This is I assume the viewer is referring to the regulations that the Biden administration was working on, but I don't think, my recollection is they did not complete them. OSHA regulations that would have established a heat standard that would have required employers to do such radical, unbelievably expensive things as provide their workers with water and an opportunity to get shade on a hot day. How socialist can you be, for goodness sakes? So the question that the viewer has is, what's going to happen? So what's going to happen? I don't know who's been covering this. Go ahead, Bill.
Well,
and then
it's very timely because there is actually a congressional response to the failure of the Department of Labor to finish the job on the heat standard. Greg Casar, a representative from Austin, is about to introduce a bill legislating a heat standard. He did this in the last Congress. He actually held a thirst in on the steps of the Capitol, where he and a bunch of progressive members of the House, refused water for, 12 hours or something, sort of like a hunger strike, to draw attention to the lack of a heat standard. Now he's introducing legislation. They're out of session now. The deadline for signing up as a supporter happens to be this week for this legislation. So I think you're going to see Congress try to step in. Of course, with this Congress and this president, not likely to succeed, but the issue is not going away.
Yeah. Michael, do you have any insights on this one? I'm sorry, Ann, go ahead. You were going to jump in.
Michael, did you want to say something first?
I've been covering this for years, unfortunately, and I think that what's going to happen is workers are going to continue dying. I've done stories and profiles where I'm talking to mothers or spouses who have lost loved ones, and it's just depressing, easily preventable. You can go on OSHA's fatality websites. They're a few months behind, but they happen every year, and it's depressing, and nothing's been being done about it. And yes, the Biden administration was in the process of this rulemaking effort, and now Republicans are trying to circumvent that and introducing a bill to make it so that the rule can never be implemented. So not only are they against it, they're actively trying to undermine any efforts to enact, like you said, there's not a lot of time, not a lot of money that goes into having to do this. It's just rest, water, and shade, and giving adequate breaks, especially. And you see it in other countries. Where my father's from, in Italy, working during the day is banned during the summer because it is too hot. It is too dangerous. And I think as the weather continues to get hotter and hotter and hotter, we're either going to see more incidents, more deaths, or we're going to have to, something's going to be done and need to be done to actually protect workers.
Yeah. Ann, did you want to get in on that one?
Yeah. There's an old saying, I think it goes, hogs get fed and the pigs get slaughtered, or vice versa. And what I think we're seeing here is that the Republicans have become more and more, and Trump in particular, more and more emboldened to take away rights of workers, and eventually workers are, revolt. And I think we're seeing that with the gas prices. Trump's popularity is at all-time low. So I think eventually this becomes an existential crisis for the Republicans, which is probably why they've been so worried about or been so interested in voter suppression and gerrymandering and all of that. So I I think while this is horrible, it is at least raising awareness about among the ordinary person that they're they are not their the Republicans are not their friends.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the things that would shock some of the Republicans who are trying to make it impossible to put forward a heat standard is how many workers this affects. This is not, I think that in their mind, this is all undocumented immigrants picking vegetables out in California. That's not the only group of people who are affected by heat, right? Construction workers
Yep.
are affected by heat. Middle-class construction workers are affected by heat. Warehouse workers are affected by heat. People who do automotive work of varying kinds are affected by heat. People in a lot of factory settings, manufacturing settings are affected by heat. This is a widespread problem that is only going to get worse. Let me just say, you don't have to believe in climate change like it's a belief, not a fact. You just have to sort of stick your head outside on a hot day and ask yourself, what would it be like to be working exposed to this kind of heat? And my guess is that if there is a Democratic administration that follows President Trump, that this will be a high priority for the Labor Department and for the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. But the reality is, and Bill, you lived this when you were at the Labor Department, and you both, Michael, you and Ann have both watched this very, very closely. It, on average, takes 7 years to produce an OSHA health standard. 7 years. So the Labor Department, it's not that the Biden Labor Department was being dilatory or irresponsible. It just takes time because there are so many hoops that you have to jump through, so many legal hoops and barriers that keep you from moving forward with, things that protect workers' lives. And it's a tragic situation. It's part of why we are where we are now. Okay, our last question that was sent in by an audience member. Okay, this is one. I happen to know who the expert on this panel is on this question, and I don't think he's going to be proud that he's the expert on it. Did a New York school district just decide to replace its teachers with AI sex bots? Is this where public education is headed in the Trump era? Now, we happen to have, I actually read your story on this, Michael.
It was a very aggravating story, but I'm happy that it helped expedite shutting it down. So
okay, so tell the story. I don't want you to read your story to us because it's a terrific story and very lengthy. So go to The Guardian, read Michael Sainato's story on the New York school district that had not a sex bot, that's not fair, but had a bot, a personification of a bot who was going to be available to answer students' questions. And the question, Michael, is this where public education is headed in the Trump era? So tell us the story and then answer that question.
So the story was, few weeks ago, this story came out without any, criticism or kind of context from teachers, especially. That this school district in Western New York, Salamanca, New York, which is actually on the Seneca Nation Reservation, had plans this fall to implement a teaching assistant humanoid robot. And the company that was doing this in 2024, there was a crypto company that bought a sex robot doll company in Las Vegas, merged, and this is, what they are getting into now, or tried to, I guess. I reached out to the New York State Teachers Union, the AFT, and I got connected with the Salamanca Teachers Association, which represents teachers at this high school. No one was happy about it, and I actually I saw a Board of Education meeting where the superintendent who was pushing this pilot program claimed that the state education department was working with them, which as soon as I saw it, I didn't believe it. I reached out to them and they said, no, we're actually really against this. The day after they gave me a comment, they sent out a letter, and then they paused the project. So that's, for the time being, it's not happening. The teachers unions were very upset. I think a lot of people, even local residents, were upset about the fact that this district was trying to put Native American children up for experimenting in this program. There were a lot of issues with it. The transparency around the plan just was unclear. But it brought up, I don't know, the First Lady Melania Trump walked out with a robot a few months ago and talked about the future is that these robots are going to be teaching kids in classrooms. And Randy Weingarten, put out a very interesting take on this, and I think that's where we've seen teachers unions and teachers in general about the fact that that's not going to happen. They're not going to let this happen. I think it's what we're going to see is employers and these industries trying to push getting these AI and these robots into these workplace settings. Obviously, without the having the input of actual workers and stakeholders. I don't think they're sensitive to that, and I think in this case, it bit them back.
Well, that's an interesting way to put it. I'm not sure I would have put it quite that way, but it's a pretty amazing story. And if you see the picture of the humanoid bot who's doing the work, it's not implausible that this was from a sex robot company. I mean, it just is not. It's not the sort of neutral presentation of a teacher, right? It was sort of very, very, very odd. But I mean, there are so many layers to this. Again, let me encourage everybody to go to The Guardian and take a look at Michael's story on this. It's pretty amazing, and it is the fear that a lot of people have about AI. It's sort of like these AI companies just can't stop scaring the hell out of people about what the future is going to look like if they have the ability to influence public institutions like public education. I'm tempted to say, Bill and Ann, anything you'd like to add to the sexbot story, but I don't know if you have anything that you'd like to say.
I pass.
I'll just say, not that it does raise the question of what is going to happen with AI and whether it's going to take over or whether there's going to be human input. And I just read yesterday a report by, I think it was a consulting firm, about the future of AI. And they said that the companies that are actually doing the best are not embracing AI to do everything, but actually utilizing human intelligence to utilize it as a tool. And so, as opposed to replacing humans, because they think differently. Obviously, AI doesn't think like a human, and humans are creative and all these other things. So, to me, it does raise a larger debate in society as to what role is AI going to play, and can we push it in a direction that's actually positive rather than destructive.
Yeah, that is the big question. Absolutely, that is the big question. All right, audience, that's overtime. Thanks for sticking with us. Thank you very much to Bill and Michael and Ann for being with us on the Power Half Hour today. We will see you back on Power at Work again very soon. Are you looking for more labor radio shows and podcasts? Well, look no further. Go to the Labor Radio Podcast Network. The network connects more than 200 radio shows and podcasts. To find more great labor content, go to www.laborradionetwork.org. Power at Work is there. You should be too.